Hi, my name is Eve and I'm from Bad Yogi Society. I've been teaching yoga for 7 years, and one of the biggest complaints I hear from students trying to advance their practice, begin their practice, or start a hand or arm balancing practice is wrist pain and wrist weakness. So I want to show you today what I love to do to warm up my wrists, for the health of my wrists, to stretch my wrists, and just to have really healthy, moving, mobile wrists to prepare myself for all of those crazy poses that I love to do in yoga. Let's get started. The first exercise I love doing is a wrist warm up before I practice arm balances, but I also love doing it on my rest days to keep the health of my tendons and my ligaments that support my wrist joints, my elbow joints, and even a little bit of my shoulder joints. It's as simple as this: extending your arms all the way out in front, pretending like you're Spider-Man, flexing your fingers down towards the floor, and then curling up your fingertips one by one before making some fists and curling the muscles in towards your shoulder joint. So reaching all the way out, extending long, stretching the hands out really slowly, really dramatically, and curling them all the way up and in towards the shoulders. I do this about 3 or 4 times in this plane, and then I flip it. So we're gonna flip it on this next one together. Stretch the hands out forward, stretch your fingertips as far as you can towards your face. It doesn't feel super comfortable. It can feel a little bit tight, especially when you're first starting out, but it's the same movement. You're curling the fingers in and then pointing your hands down towards the floor. Really, really lovingly, slowly draw them back up, keeping it nice and gentle to protect your wrists, and curling it all the way back in. We'll just do one more just like that, and that's all it takes to warm it up. And my last one's a favorite because it makes me feel like an adorable little dinosaur. You pull your elbows in close, you do the same exact thing, hands down, squeeze your fingertips in, and pull it all the way out and up. It's kind of like if T-Rex was warming up to do yoga, but I don't think he'd be able to do many poses. Last time, and that's all you gotta do. After my novel wrist movements, I love to come into a tabletop position, hands on the floor. Always, if your hands are too sensitive to be on the floor, or if you've got any wrist pain going on, you can do this against the wall and it takes a little bit of the pressure off. But if you're ready to come to the floor, hands will set underneath your shoulders, and rather than moving into some cat and cow shapes like you would in a normal yoga practice, we're going to start to move the weight forward and backwards over the wrist joint. So bringing pressure evenly through both of your hands, shifting all of the weight forward and backwards just a couple of times. All it takes is about 3 or 4 times to start to get that joint moving. And then after that, taking this into a circular movement. Now here, it's a pretty vulnerable exercise. Your wrist is only a tiny little joint, so moving as slowly and as carefully as you can. And if you're feeling any pain, I would just back off from that weight and come over to the wall. So once you've done circles a couple of times in one direction, you reverse the direction, and that is wrist circles. And the very next step is to turn your fingertips outwards, so away from each other. The backs of your wrists are facing to the center of the mat, and we take that side to side rather than back and forth. So just same kind of slow tension as far as you comfortably can, moving and sliding side to side. Once you've done that a couple of times, the next thing to do, this is also a little bit vulnerable, taking one or both hands, fingertips facing towards the knees, and this time we'll move into the shoulders a little bit. So drawing the shoulder blades together, looking all the way towards the front, and then drawing your chin towards your chest, tucking the tail, rounding the spine, and drawing the hips back. Now, how far back you go depends on how flexible and how mobile your wrists already are, so don't worry too much about that. Just stop where it starts to feel tender, where it starts to feel like it's having a little stretch. We'll do 2 more of those, slow and controlled. And last one. Really nice. Now really carefully dismount from this shape. We'll take it to the opposite side, always maintaining control, always maintaining a little bit of care. And it's the same movement with the spine, a little bit of spinal extension, and then spinal flexion, tuck the tail, draw the belly button in, and then pull the weight back until you feel a little bit of a wrist stretch. We'll do that 2 more times, lifting up, pulling through, sending weight all the way back towards the heels. Last time, you don't want to overextend, but go to a point where it feels challenging. and then a gentle peel of those wrists back to the floor. I like to give myself a little break with some gentle movements in between so as not to overload the joint too much. It is a muscular exercise, it is a strengthening exercise. The next thing I like to do, I call them French and English bulldogs. I'm pretty sure they're not called that, but that's what I'm going to call them. And how I like to position my hands, it depends on how strong I'm feeling in the day. The closer my knees are to my hands, the lighter this is going to be for the wrists. The further away, the harder this is going to be. So the very first thing I do is come up to the tops of my fists. So this is like a little French bulldog with cute little straight legs. And then from here, we're just going to slowly draw your pinkies towards the floor as you bend into the elbows, and then push straight back up. And then take your thumbs towards the floor, stretching into the front of the wrists. Really nice. Pulling all the way back down and all the way forward. We'll just do one more like that. And now we move into English bulldogs. So from here, bending the elbows all the way out to the side, rolling onto the back of the hands like a little grumpy English bulldog. And then you'll straighten out the hands, straighten out the fingertips as you come down to the floor. Now that's really challenging. So you're gonna make fists again, keep the fists, super slowly straighten back up and come back to that French bulldog. Now that, if you can see my hands, you can see that I'm shaking right now. That's already really challenging to do that super slowly. Back to the hands to the floor, keep the fists, stretch the fingers out, pull the fingers in, straighten out through the arms as much as you can with those fists. Now my fingers are fighting to not flick out. So that's the challenge here, and coming back to the tops of the fists. We'll just do one more. English bulldog to French bulldog transition. Now that our wrists are nice and prepped from those English and French bulldog transitions, we're going to move into some finger and wrist push-ups. So the very first thing to do is to keep all of your knuckles on the floor except for your thumb, as you straighten the arms and then lift the heels of your hands up off the floor and lower down. Nice. I like to do 10 of these. Now, if you're feeling pretty strong, you can switch to take your knees further back so you're in a half plank position, and that's going to take heaps more weight into the hands and it's going to feel a lot more challenging. So if that's where you're at in your practice, that's a really good way to strengthen. You could even work up to being in a full plank pose and practicing from there. I definitely can't do that. So we're just going to move into 10 of these wrist push-ups, and then we'll move into finger push-ups, which are my absolute favorite. So this strengthens not only your wrists, it strengthens your fingertips, it strengthens your tendons. So what you're going to do is come all the way up to the fingertips and just hold, and then come back down to the hands. So I like to do 5 of these on each side to move into a little bit of strength into the fingertips, because your fingers really drive all of those arm balancing movement. It's not so much your wrists or your hands, but there's a lot of that balance that happens in your fingertips. So after doing 5 on each side of those, we're moving into, I like to call them finger pinches. So we're trying to warm up this muscle between your index finger and your thumb. It's a nice juicy little muscle there. And how to do that is to take your hands to the mat, index finger and thumb squeeze, and it's kind of like you're trying to roll up your mat, like pinching it as hard as you can. And I hold that for 10 seconds and we go 3 times. Really nice. We're going to do 2 more of those. Pinching as much as you can, as hard as you can, feeling that muscle switch on, and then relaxing. And 1 lucky last time. And relaxing that all the way back down. Now, my wrists, my hands, my shoulders even are pretty ready to start practicing just a regular normal yoga practice, or to start to move into an arm balancing practice. So I want to show you a little bit of wrist cool downs to do after you have been balancing on your hands for a really long time. It's super simple, interlacing fingers, pressing your hands forward and just pushing and pushing and pushing until you feel a little stretch happening in your wrists here, or in your forearms here. Same thing, take it all the way up towards the sky. Imagine pulling your fingertips apart and then releasing that back down. And this time a little bit less pressure on the hands as you place them by the sides of your knees and have a little stretch out. You can round the spine and arch the back to make this sensation change, just as you did in those cat and cow variations. And then turning the hands the opposite way and stretching out the wrists in that same fashion. So that concludes a healthy wrist warm-up, healthy wrist prep, and healthy wrist cool down for a hand balancing and arm balancing practice.